For more, let's bring in former Dallas Fed president and senior analyst at Jefferies, Richard Fisher. Richard, great to have you with us. We played that clip from President Trump, but he had a lot more to say about Powell. He also said we have a guy that's just a stubborn mule and a stupid person that is making a big mistake. And he basically said that he will get another Fed chair in who wants to cut rates. There are plenty of people out there who want to cut rates. What do you make of this strategy, if you will?
Well, first, it's schoolboy taunting. By the way, he's nothing compared to Lyndon Johnson. There's a history here. We had a Fed chairman, Bill Martin, from 1951 to 1970. Lyndon Johnson took him down to the ranch in Texas, shoved him up against the wall, punched him, and said, "My boys are dying in Vietnam, and you will not cut interest rates." Martin did. He went to his deathbed, he said in his memoirs, ashamed of himself. Jay Powell's not going to do that. Moreover, it was because of Bill Martin set the stage for the worst Fed chairman in history, Arthur Burns, who is a disgrace to the Federal Reserve System. Now, if you were to name a shadow chair, unless it is Scott Bessant, who, as you saw today, is articulate, knowledgeable, has a great background, as the next successor, no one's going to pay attention to the shadow chair. They will immediately be labeled an Arthur Burns. Burns gave in to two presidents, and he led to the great inflation that Paul Volcker had to come in and break its back. So I don't think much of this idea. I wish the president would tone down his rhetoric. I think I know Jay Powell pretty well. He's a strong individual. By the way, he's not a moron. He's very smart. He's capable. He understands markets. And it's not affecting him at all.
If a Fed chair is appointed by President Trump, who is effectively a lackey, let's say, which is basically what you're positing, we know that that person will be cutting rates. And whether rate cuts start again in the back half of the year, we know whoever comes in 11 months or so, they will cut rates further. What does it matter if they're regarded as somebody who is just bending into Trump if, in the end, cutting rates down to 1% will start the greatest growth period of our history? I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
No,
I mean,
but
is there a danger to cutting to 1%?
It depends on what the numbers are. Even Kevin Warsh has said, and he and I were there at the same time, we'll never cut rates to zero again. 1% is a thin margin, assuming he's talking nominal rates above zero. Cutting rates to zero distorted decision-making, allowed people to discount the present value of future cash flows to infinity. We did it on purpose because we had a mega crisis. There's not a mega crisis right now. So I think the biggest problem is going to be people will remember the last Fed chairman who gave in to the presidents, and the worst Fed chairman in history of the Federal Reserve System was Arthur Burns. We don't want another Arthur Burns. We want a Fed chairman who can stand up to and do the right thing, whatever any president wants, whether it's Richard Nixon or Lyndon Johnson or Donald Trump. And I think the only one that I've seen in terms of the names that have been posited, all the photos you showed earlier today, that could be a good successor to Jay Powell and have credibility would be Scott Bessant. He's mature. He's the biggest adult in the cabinet. He's experienced in dealing with the president.
So Richard, just jumping on that, Scott Bessant is too important to Treasury, I would assume, to let him go. So I agree with you. I think he would probably be the best candidate, but he's too important where he's at. But in his words, Bessant's words, the Fed is tight because the Fed funds rate is above the 2-year. And the chairman thinks that he's mildly tight or moderately tight. So I think this is what the dynamic, excluding all the rhetoric from President Trump. Do you think the Fed is tight, moderately tight, sort of tight right now? And does that make it a more complex issue with all of the rhetoric coming from the president?
I think it's running a good monetary policy. Again, the president said, look, inflation's down to 1.7%. Scott Bessant said the same thing. Guess who that's due to? The Federal Reserve. Now, unemployment is still hovering in the 4% plus range. That's historically fantastic. So it could be that what the president's doing is setting up somebody else to take the fall if the fiscal policy just doesn't quite work. I hope it does. But right now, I think monetary policy is normal range. And that can be a bit of a debate whether the 2% is lower than the 3-month Treasury, et cetera. But what this really comes down to is what affects businesses. The Fed funds rate, no business runs their business according to the Fed funds rate. They key off the 10-year or the 7-year or the longer part of the curve. And that will be determined by supply and demand in the marketplace. It's not the Federal Reserve's influence that moves those instruments.